we are finally to the end of this quarter. I'm sure that most of you guys are super ready for summer break and psyched that you're done with your research paper. Woohoo! So if you haven't already turned that in, turn it in ASAP, please. And we're finishing the book this week, so woohoo! We are wrapping it up. We should have read pages all the way through 127, and so now we're kind of going into 128 until the very end, which is page 158. So if you notice, there's a whole chunk in the back here that you're not going to read. So even though it looks like there's still a lot of reading left to do, there's actually not that much. So if you remember from last week, that was the super big action kind of a scene where Montag had killed Beetee, and so he is now running and he's in Faber's house, and they had just on page 127 seen that they had released the Mechanical Hound. And so the big part about the Mechanical Hound, like any other hound, is that it can smell you out. And so that's going to be a big problem for Montag as he tries to escape. So we're kind of picking up on page 128, and they kind of decide that Faber in the morning is going to leave to go to St. Louis, and Montag is trying to cover his scent. So he is taking some of Faber's old clothes. He's like dousing himself in whiskey so that he doesn't smell quite so much like himself. And they are watering down the sidewalks. They are burning parts of Faber's house just so that hopefully it'll kind of slow down the Mechanical Hound. And so, boom, there goes Montag. He's running towards the river. So he's running towards the river because maybe if he can get to the river, he can cover up his scent. So he's running, and when it talks about people who are watching, they're all watching this go down. They're watching the hunt of the game, of this Mechanical Hound that is going out there and is hunting down this Montag. And so they even request that people go out and see, hey, can you see this guy running? And if you're looking on page 132, it's saying that Montag is like sprinting as fast as he possibly can because this Mechanical Hound is right on his heels. And he just barely makes it to the river right as people start to open their doors to see if they can find him. And so that's what it's kind of saying on page 133, and is kind of going all the way through page 134 is basically Montag has gotten away with it. He is floating down this river, and for the first time he is in the real world. Now if you look on page 134, there is this whole kind of page about how he's looking at the sun and he's realizing that the sun is burning time. And if you kind of look at this towards the bottom, it says one of them had to stop burning. This whole paragraph is basically telling us about the fact that his task has now changed. So do you remember what his other task was before? If you remember, and he did this before, he took books and he would put them in firemen's houses to get them to burn down the firemen's houses. He was very centered on the idea that firemen were the problem, but now he has a whole new set of purpose now. If you're kind of looking in here, it says somewhere the saving and putting away had to begin again, and somebody had to do the saving and the keeping, one way or another, in books and records, in people's heads. Anyway, so as long as it was safe, free from moths, silverfish, rust, and dry rot. So basically, what he's saying is that his goal is now changing from just destroying firemen to actually preserving the books themselves. So what I want you to kind of answer in your Google Docs is, why is this so overwhelming for him? Why is this river journey so overwhelming for Montag? So that's what I want you to answer in the Google Doc. As we're kind of going through page 137 and into 136 into 137, it's talking about this vision that Montag has now that he's out in the countryside of being in a loft and seeing a girl like Clarice just living happily in a farmhouse, and coming down from the loft and being safe, and at the bottom of the loft is a glass of fresh milk and a few apples and pears laid out for him. So he's envisioning this whole life that's so completely different from anything that he's really ever known, except for this one faint memory in his childhood of being on a farm. He comes out of the river and he's walking along and he comes to the railroad tracks. And if you remember, Faber had told him, if you follow the railroad tracks, you'll find other people who are out there trying to change the world, basically, who are trying to be proponents of knowledge. And so when it's talking all about on page 138 down at the bottom, when it's talking about his ears were stuffed with sound, his eyes were stuffed with blackness, basically what it's just saying is, remember, this is happening at night. So if you're walking around in the woods at night and it's completely dark, and all you can hear is everything that's going around you, like all of the animals and the wind rushing through the trees. So that's sort of what it's talking about there. If you notice on page 139, there's this line where he sees a far off fire in the distance, and all of a sudden it's like it's different for him now. It says that it's not burning, that it's warming. He never knew that fire had a purpose other than just burning and destroying. And this is sort of what he's talking about when he talks in this whole paragraph about he was a thing of the brush and a liquid eye and fur. Basically what he's saying is that he kind of felt like an animal who was watching unseen from the bushes. If you haven't already gotten this by now, Ray Bradbury loves to just put tons of fluff and like making everything seem bigger. There's a part in here where it's talking about them like cooking up some bacon, and instead of just saying like, oh, we're cooking up some bacon, he made it sound like this like magical tradition. And so you kind of just have to, as much as we can appreciate the artistic quality of the fluff, sometimes you kind of just have to scrape away a little bit to see what he's actually talking about. All right, so we kind of go into page 140 and we meet this new character whose name is Granger. And Granger is kind of the guy who's going to tell Montag what's it. So if you've read, which you should have already read, you know that Granger talks a lot. And basically what he's saying is he's showing Montag on the screen that they're still continuing this manhunt, like where's Montag? But the government doesn't want to admit that they've lost him. And so what they do is they kind of use it as a scapegoat. This person who's like Clarice, who's smart and intelligent and an outsider, and they make him into a scapegoat. And so basically filming him and kind of distorting his face so it makes it look like they caught Montag, but they never really caught him at all. So we kind of go through there, and then we are introduced to all of these people. So who are these people? Who are these people who are huddled around the fire in the woods? If you read on page 143, you kind of get their ideas and their names. Basically, these are professors or people who wrote books or pastors or people who are just generally well-read. And you kind of go into page 144 and into 145, and you see that they have a whole different philosophy on how they're going to repair this knowledge. So basically what it's saying on page 144 is saying that you can destroy books. If we're caught with books, we're in big trouble. But what you can't do is you can't destroy the mind. So if I memorize everything in a book, then I'm that book, basically. I can go on and I can recite this book from memory, and so the book will live as long as I'm alive. So when it's talking about, I'm Plato's Republic, I'm Marcus Aurelius, basically what they're saying is that I've memorized this book, and as long as I'm alive, this book will continue. And I can pass this on to my kids, and basically what we're going to do is we're just gonna have to wait until the general public is ready to listen to us. When things have gotten so bad that they are looking for other answers, that they come to us, and we can use this knowledge to help fix society. It's kind of more of a hands-off decision. So whether you think that could be a good decision or a good option or not, this is what this group, and this is what Montag really is buying into, is that you can just, everybody can just memorize different books, and then in the end, we'll still have at least the majority of what the books are meaning to say. We'll have this escape plan for when the world kind of gets destroyed. Okay, so when it's talking, let's see, we're just continuing on. So we're kind of getting into page 149, 150, 151, and if you remember from this whole book, there's been a lot of mentions of this upcoming war, of this war that's coming up. And if you remember from just the last section, they had just declared that war was coming. And so now the sun is up, and these men and Montag have walked, and they're kind of overlooking the city at a hill. And Montag is just sort of remembering his wife. When Granger is talking about his grandfather, he's not just talking about his one purpose, his one person that he's talking about, his grandfather. He's sort of talking about, it's like talking in a metaphor, which, by the way, this whole book is like a metaphor. Basically what it's saying is that your whole life is defined by your actions. And the reason that Montag does not feel bad, or really even that sad that Millie is going to die, is because she never did anything. Really it all comes down to, people are going to remember you for the change that you made in their lives. They're going to remember the impact that you had, instead of rather just that you were a person, but rather what you did. So if you don't do anything, nobody's going to remember you. And that's sort of what he's saying on page 149 and then 150. I want to be very clear when it's talking about the war starting, as they're on this hill and they're overlooking the city. So remember that this book was written in the 1950s. And even if you don't know a lot about the 1950s, you might know that the Cold War was happening during the 1950s. This was just after World War II, and a lot of Americans were super, super afraid of a nuclear bomb being exploded somewhere in the major cities in the United States from the Soviet Union. Because the way that we ended World War II was we nuclear bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end Japan, to end Japan's involvement in World War II. And so that's how we kind of, that ended in 1945, and this book was written in 1953. So this is only about 8 years after the first nuclear bomb had gone off, and we had just started to find out that Russia has this nuclear bomb. And so when it's talking about how the war was over in an instant, and how they're overlooking this hill, and how they're seeing the bombs being dropped from a great distance, that's what it's talking about. It's talking about a nuclear bomb. It's talking about a nuclear warfare that is going on, and it's so destructive that it's over really in like just a second. It's so fast. And so when he's talking about Mildred Montag, he's standing on top of the hill, and he just has this picture in his mind of Mildred sitting there watching her TV right as the bomb explodes. And all of a sudden the TV screen goes blank. And in the split second before her life ends, she realizes that her life is meaningless. That she actually has to look into a mirror and realize that nothing that she's ever done is worth anything right as she dies. Which is a deep thought. It's a crazy thought, and it's super depressing. But if you think about it, how would that affect Montag's mindset of having just heard what Granger said about your life is full of your decisions and your actions and what you can provide for the world, and then seeing your wife, who literally didn't do anything, die, and how she's probably regretting that in her last hour? You definitely think that that's going to have a huge impact on the way that Montag is going to be thinking from here on out. And so when it's talking about him and the other men being blown backwards, that's based off of the blast from the nuclear bomb. So basically, this nuclear bomb blows up, and it blows up the city and basically turns the whole city to rubble, and Montag and all of his men are blown backwards by the force of the blast. And in the force of the blast, he now is starting to realize, as he's kind of like semi-conscious because he just got blown back by a nuclear bomb, he is starting to realize that he remembers things. He remembers where he met Millie, and he remembers this book of Ecclesiastes and Revelation. And he's only been out in the real world for probably like less than 12 hours at this point, and already his memory is starting to come back to him. And so that's kind of where it kind of goes into on page 156. So on page 156, it's talking all about a phoenix. And a phoenix is basically a bird that every couple hundred years or so would build this pyre, or basically this giant furnace of some kind, and throw itself into there and kill itself, and then rise again. So if you've ever heard of like the phoenix rising from the ashes, that's kind of where this is. And so Granger actually relates humanity to the phoenix, how every couple hundred years or so we have some sort of a war or some sort of forgetting who we really are, and then it takes society burning down and us having to rise again, that we're able to kind of regroup and come back. But he's saying that maybe, just maybe, one day we can get to a point where that's not going to be the case anymore. That gradually more and more people will remember what it's like to not lose sight of the goal, to be focused on knowledge and bettering the world, so that history doesn't have to always repeat itself. We'll pick up a few more people every once in every generation. And if you kind of go into page 157, this first paragraph, come on now, we're going to build a mirror factory and put in nothing but mirrors for the next year and take a long look at them. So basically what he's saying is we're going to take advantage of the fact that this war has nuclear bombed every major city in the United States. We're going to take advantage of this, and we're going to put a mirror in front of the United States and in front of the world and show them this is what you're doing to yourself. Look in the mirror. This isn't going to work. You can't go back to the old way of living. The only way that you can continue onwards is to learn from the mistakes of the past and to continue into the future. And this is sort of another cue into not having another world war, or not just having war in general. Basically, it's just talking about we're going to build the biggest steam shovel in history and dig the biggest grave of all time and shove war into it and cover it up. Maybe one day we'll get to the point where we are so self-aware or so intelligent almost, that Granger is kind of hinting out, that will eliminate war, that we don't have to have war anymore. Which it totally makes sense if you realize that this did happen right after World War II. And they had just seen all these wars devastate, and now we're in a nuclear war that could destroy everybody and humanity. That's a pretty big war. So maybe this will shock us into our senses. And if you read through, it kind of ends, and then on page 158, the last little half page there, he's talking about, he's continuing onwards with these men for the sole mission of keeping the books alive, to spreading hope to others through this knowledge that he carries and everybody else in this community carries. And when all these things that he is reciting in his mind, these are from the book of Ecclesiastes. And so when it's talking all about the tree of life, it's talking about the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. That he carries this healing of the nations text that can be used to help heal the nations. And that is the end of Fahrenheit 451. You guys made it 100% online. Congratulations. It is a heavy book. It is a lot of metaphors into it, but I do hope that you were able to get something out of it and out of the books this year, and just get a general survey of American literature. So I will be sending out on Monday of this week, I sent out the last of the assignment. You just have to watch this video, answer the questions, and then do the short little quiz, and then you're done for me. The only thing that you guys will have is just summer reading over the summer. So what I would expect for you guys to get is an email with the details of summer reading for Miss Cleaver. And it's also going to be on the BCS website under the summer reading tab. And if you ever have any questions about summer reading or any sort of thing like that, go ahead and just shoot me an email. I do occasionally check it over the summer. or you can email Miss Cleaver as well, since she will be your English teacher next year. It has been a great year with you guys. I've learned so much alongside with you, and I hope that I will see you guys next year. The majority of you guys will be in my US history class, where we can learn more about nuclear bombs. Alright guys, have a great summer, and I'll see you next school year.